one of the important question in that is first sum MA Indian Economy Problems and Policies. That is the question in 2020. Question is that difference between GDP and GVA. Mention the contribution of different sectors in GDP and GVA. First, what is the difference between GVA and GDP? And second part, it shows that mention the contribution of different sectors in GDP and GVA. In order to explain this question, first we move to the first part, that is what is meant by GVA. GVA is that gross value added. Gross value added. From this you got some idea that here there is an addition of value. Addition of value added here. Gross means total, then value means monetary value. Here there is a value added to a product. That is equal to gross value added. That is simple meaning. Here there is a value addition to the product. Then here there is a one is that what is meant by here there is a value added of a product. That is equal to GVA, gross value added. GVA is equal to GVO minus GVI. GVA equal to GVO minus GVI. That is GVA means GVO means that is the gross value of output minus GVI means gross value of input. In short, the difference between output and input. The difference between that is how much value added to the output after that is the cost of input, that is equal to gross value added. GVA, that is equal to value added to the product. That is gross value of output minus gross value of input, that is equal to gross value added here. So what is the purpose of gross value added? Then what is the meaning and definition of gross value added? Then the main use or purpose is that gross value added used to calculate GDP. GDP is that gross domestic product. Gross domestic product shows that here there is a detailed explanation about GDP. So first it is GVA used to measure, that is, or to calculate GDP. That is GDP calculate or measured with three forms or three ways here. One is that income method, and second is that expenditure method, and third is that gross value added. In that way, GDP it is used to calculate GDP. Then it is used to how much value is added to a particular region or state or province. That is gross value added. This is mainly used to how much value added to a state, region or province. That is the another important use or purpose of gross value added. And next is that this is mainly used to measure economic welfare of the population, because that is it is included all primary incomes. It is mainly used to measure the economic welfare of the population. To measure economic welfare of the population, we can use the GVA, gross value added, because it includes all primary incomes. And finally, what is the definition of GVA? Gross value added is the value added to the product to enhance various aspects of the product. That's value added to the product. How much value added to the product to enhance or to increase the various aspects of the product, that is equal to GVA. These are the main important points included here. What about GVA? What about the usage of UVA? That's GVA. And what about the definition is that? In short, GVA is that gross value added to the product to enhance various aspects of the product. That is the important definition of GVA. So GVA is equal to GVO minus, that is GVO minus GVI. There is one more equation also. That is GVA, that is equal to GDP, gross domestic product, plus subsidies on product. subsidies on product minus taxes on product. GVA, that is equal to gross value added, that is equal to GDP plus subsidies on product. How much subsidy allotted to the product, that is added here, and minus how much taxes on the product. These are the important meaning and definition and usage of gross value added. In short, GVA, that is equal to GDP plus then subsidies on the product minus taxes on the product, that is equal to GVA. So first we explain what is meant by gross value added. It shows that there is a value added to the product or services, or GVO minus GVI, that is equal to GVA, or that is GDP plus subsidies minus tax, that is equal to GVA. Now that is next we move to what about GDP? GDP represents as gross domestic product. It is defined, that is in the case of GDP is defined as, this is the monetary value of all final goods and services produced within a country, that is during a specific period of time. That is definition of GDP, that is equal to the monetary value of all finished goods or final goods and services produced within a country during a specific period of time. So this definition included, or it divided into three parts. One is that gross. Gross means that is the, it shows that gross value, that is gross means total. GDP, that is the summation of G plus D plus P. G plus D plus P. That is gross domestic product. In the case of GDP, gross means total. Domestic means within the country, within the locality, or within, that is here there is a boundary is there within the country. Then that is product. Product means that this is the final goods or finished goods, does not include the intermediate product, only the final goods included here. So gross domestic product, gross means total, D means domestic, that is within the country or within the locality, then P means product, only included finished goods or final goods. What is the definition of GDP? This is the monetary value of all finished goods and services produced within the country. That is, it only included finished goods. That is, does not include or does not consider intermediate product, or that is only included finished products or final products. Then those products which are produced within the country. That is, those goods and that services, final goods and services which are produced within the country, within our economy, that is included here. At the same time, it during a specific period of time, a particular period here. That in India, we taken into account the financial year. Financial year range from, here there is a 1st April to March 31st. 1st April to March 31st. This is represent as a specific period in Indian context. This is the financial period. That is the definition of, that is the gross domestic product. Gross means total, D means domestic within the country or within the territory, P means only the product which are included, only the finished goods, does not consider intermediate product. So gross domestic product, it represents as the monetary value of all finished goods and services produced within the country during a specific period of time. Specific period means our financial year, that is 1st April to March 31st. Then here there is some of the equation here. GDP, that is equal to sigma GVA plus taxes minus subsidy. Already explained here, GVA, sigma, that is summation of gross value added plus taxes minus subsidy. GVA, that is equal to GDP minus, that is GDP plus subsidies minus taxes, that is equal to, that is GVA. GVA, that is equal to GDP plus, that is subsidies minus taxes, that is equal to GVA. here there is GDP that is equal to sigma GVA plus taxes minus subsidy. It added taxes and does not consider subsidies. Then here the summation, that is summation of graph, that is gross value added. So GDP mainly calculated based on income method, expenditure method and gross value added. So gross value added is the important mechanism or measure used to calculate GDP. So sigma GVA plus taxes minus subsidy, that is equal to GDP, gross domestic product. Other equation is that GDP equal to private consumption, individual consumption plus gross investment, total investment plus government investment, that is government invested in various projects plus government spending, government expenditure plus export minus import, that is equal to trade, export minus import. This also is the another important equation of GDP. GDP that is equal to private consumption plus gross investment plus government investment plus government spending plus export minus import or trade. That is the another important equation. So first, what is meant by GDP? GDP is the monetary value of all final goods or finished goods produced within the economy. That goods and services produced within the country during a specific period of time. Here there is an equation is that GDP that is equal to sigma GVA plus taxes minus subsidy. Another equation is that GDP that is equal to private consumption plus gross, that is investment plus government spending plus trade or export minus import. So this is about the meaning and definition and equation of the GDP. So we explain here what is meant by GVA and what is meant by GDP. Next we move to the question. The question is that difference between GDP and GVA. Based on the clarification or meaning and definition of GDP and GVA, next we move to what are the main important differences between GDP and GVA. So the first part of our question is that difference between GDP and GVA. So to make the clear picture about the difference, first we explain what is the meaning and definition of GDP and GVA. Next, what about the important difference between GDP and GVA? Gross domestic product and gross value added, which are the important difference. The first important difference is that is in the case of GVA, it is value added to the product or services. That is GVA is the gross value added to the product or services. That is here there is it included only the addition to the value added to the product or services, that is equal to GVA. But in the case of GDP, it not only the value added, but it included total amount of the product. Total amount of the product, does it only included the finished products or final goods, does not taken into account the intermediate product. So total amount of product it accepted or considered in the case of GDP, but the case of GVA it only included gross value added to the product. That's the first difference. And second is that in the case of GVA mainly concern the economic activity from the producer side. GVA mainly concern economic activity from the producer side, or that is equal to supply side. But in the case of the GDP, it mainly considered economic activity from the consumer side or demand side. One is producer side and another is the consumer side. Demand side that is equal to the GDP and supply side that is equal to GVA. And third is that in the case of GVA, it taken into account economic growth and welfare. It considered economic growth and welfare, but in the case of the GDP, it only taken into account the economic welfare. Economic welfare here. Then, and next is that economic welfare and economic growth. Here GDP taken into account the economic growth and welfare, but in GVA it only taken into account the economic welfare. GVA only taken into account the economic welfare, but in the case of GDP it considered economic growth and welfare. And next is that in the case of GVA used to measuring, that is calculation of GDP. That's mainly used to the contribution to GDP. That is GVA mainly used to measuring how much contributed to GDP. It is calculated based on GVA. GVA is the measuring rod to GDP here. That is GDP mainly calculated with the help of, that is income, expenditure, and here there is a GVA. So the measuring out, that is the contribution to GDP mainly based on, that is GVA, but this is the summation of GVA of all sectors. GDP, that is equal to sigma GVA. So the summation of GVA to, that's GVA from all sectors, this is included GDP. And next is that GVA considered as the integral and necessary parameter for measuring country's performance. It is mainly used to integral and here there is a necessary parameter for measuring, or that is one country's economic performance. GVA mainly used to measuring country's economic performance. But in the case of, that is GDP, which does not consider the economic performance. And that is GVA, this is more specific. That is, this is mainly specific, but the case of here, it included all sectors of the economy. That is, one is more specific, this is not specific. And GDP does not include, that is intermediate product. Does not include the intermediate product. So these are the main difference between GDP and GVA. One is supply and another is demand, and one is the value of the product and another is the total amount of the product. And next is, one is economic welfare and next is economic welfare and economic growth. And one is that there is measuring contribution to GDP, but see, that is in the case of, that is GDP is that summation of the GVA of all sectors. One is specific and this is not specific, and this is GVA considered as the economic, that is integral, that is one is the necessary and integral parameter for measuring economic performance. These are the main difference between GDP and GVA. So this is the first part of our question, that in the year of 2020 there is difference between GDP and GVA. To explain GDP and GVA's difference, first what is meant by GDP and GVA, its uses, its meaning, then we analyze what are the important difference between GDP and GVA. Next is that what are the importance or advantages of GVA and what are the disadvantages of GVA. That's the next. And next is that what are the advantage and disadvantages of gross value added. There is advantage and disadvantages of gross value added. The first is that there is gross value added. This is internationally comparable figure. In the case of EV added, that's gross value. It is internationally comparable figure is applied in or used in the case of gross, that is GVA. And second is that it is mainly used to better market condition project globally. That's here there is a to analyze better market condition, that's based on FII. That is here there is a better market condition analyze or globally analyze with the help of GVA. And third is that better measure of the economy. This is very important measure to analyze the economic growth of an economy. That is, there is gross value added. It mainly used to economic performance of the economy. And last is that it is mainly help to the policy makers to make decision. It helps to the policy makers to take the suitable decision. These are the main important advantage here. One is that here there is a internationally comparable figure. This is properly used in the case of GVA, and that is to analyze better market condition globally. That is based on that global analysis. based on the better market condition. And third is that better measure of the economy. That is economic growth came. This is mainly applied with the help of GVA. And last is that it helps to the policymakers to take suitable decision. These are the main important advantages here. And let's see that what are the important disadvantages of GVA. The first is that accuracy of GVA depend upon the sources of data. If the data is not available in proper manner, this adversely affects the calculation of GVA. That is, success of or accuracy of GVA, this is depend upon the sources of data. Data is not available, accuracy of GVA is not possible. So, does not use better measure of economic growth of an economy. This is not possible. So, dependency of source of data is an important measure to make accuracy of GVA. And second is that this is susceptible to vulnerable from the use of inappropriate or flaws. That is in the case of it is very susceptible, not proper to the vulnerable section because from the use of inappropriate or flaws. That does not take proper decision to the vulnerable or proper care to the vulnerable. That's susceptible to the vulnerable because from the use of inappropriate, not suitable or flaws. So it is considered as a susceptible method here. This is susceptible to the vulnerable because from the use of inappropriate or flaws. There are so many problems that existed in the sources of data. And last is that comparison over time is difficult. Here there is a over time comparison is very difficult. These are the three important problems. One is that accuracy depend upon the sources of data, and second is that it is susceptible to the vulnerable because of the use of inappropriate or flaws, and third is that over time comparison is difficult. These are the main important disadvantage and advantages. The advantage is that here there is a internationally comparable figure, then better market condition, better measure of the economy, and now see that it helps to the policy makers to make decisions. These are the important advantage and disadvantage. And last part of this question is that what about then mention the contribution of different sectors in GDP and GVA. Then next part of this question is that mention the contribution of different sectors in GDP and GVA. So the main contribution of different sectors. Sectors mainly classified into three. They are primary, secondary and tertiary, or first, second and third sector. Primary sector, that is equal to agriculture and allied activities, mainly animal husbandry, fishing, forestry, quarrying, etc. They are included in the first, agriculture and allied activities. Secondary sector, that is equal to manufacturing, gas, then construction, water supply, electricity, etc. They are included in the secondary sector. Third sector, that is equal to trade, transport, communication, real estate, public administration, banking, insurance. These are the main important sectors are included in the third sector. So the summation of first, second and third sector, how much it contribute to GDP, gross domestic product, this is explained with the help of there is table here. That it included that these sectors contribution, first sector, second sector and third sector's contribution, it explained with in percentage and based on current prices. Based on the current prices, how much is the personal contribution to GDP from, that is first, that is agriculture and allied activities, second the manufacturing sector or secondary sector, and third service sector like trade, transport, etc. These are the main important sectors. So in the case of first, that is the first sector contribution in the year of 1950-51. First sector, that is equal to agriculture and allied activities. In the year of 1950-51, its contribution 51.81. That's 51.81, the first sector's contribution in 1950-51. In the same year, secondary sector contribution, that is the contribution of manufacturing sector, this was only 14.16. So more than half is the contribution of agriculture to GDP, but in the case of secondary sector, this was less than 15, that's 14.16. And third, service sector contribution, that is 33.25. So in the year of 1950-51, there's generally agriculture contribution greater than other two sectors, and second it goes to the service sector, and last is the secondary sector. Then in the year of 2011-12, so agriculture sector contribution, this is less than 20, that is 16.38%. Then from 1950-51 it was 51.81. That is the performance of agriculture sector to GDP, this very low, that is 16.38. But in the case of the secondary sector, manufacturing sector, its contribution doubled here, 29.34. Then service sector also, this also may be 54.2. So here there is a good performance in the case of service sector. So here there is a steady decline in the performance of the agriculture sector, that is equal to 16.38. Then in the year of 2013-14, agriculture performance a minor increase or gradual increase here, 18.20%, but industrial sector comes down, 29 it declined to 24.77%. Here there is a gradual increase in the performance of service sector as 57.03%. Then in 2017, that agriculture sector contribution to GDP, this also comes down, 15.4, industrial sector 23.0%. Then here there is a service sector, here there is a increase in the service sector performance, that is 61.5%. In the year of 2021, then agriculture performance, here there is a gradual increase here, 20.19, because people are ready to increase or engage in agriculture sector. So here there is a minor increase in the or small level increase in the agriculture performance, that is equal to 20.19. Then industrial sector also, here there is a small increase, 25.92. Then service sector, there is a minor decline, 53.89. So this is here there is a sector contribution to GDP at current prices in percentage. So from this we conclude that here there is a sharp decline in the agriculture sector performance, at the same time increase in the performance service sector, then here there is a gradual increase in the secondary sector. So these are about the sectoral contribution to GDP here.